The hallway rug was missing, and the floor beneath it was wet. It wasn't just damp in the way old houses sometimes were, where humidity crept up through wood and gathered in quiet corners. This was deliberate wetness. A thin, dark sheen stretched across the exposed boards, as if something had been lifted carefully, set aside, and revealed, not discovered, but uncovered. Mara stood in the doorway, one hand still resting on the wall where she'd reached for the light switch. She hadn't flipped it yet. The dim spill from the living room lamp stretched behind her, stopping just short of the wet patch, as though the light itself were hesitant. The rug had always been there. A faded runner with a fraying edge that curled up near the baseboard. She had stepped over that curl every day for the past 3 years. She had meant to replace it. She had never gotten around to it. Now it was gone, and the floor was wet. She listened. The house answered a second later. A faint, hollow creak moved down the hallway, not from where she stood, but from somewhere deeper inside, like an echo that had waited too long to return. It didn't match her stillness. It didn't belong to anything she had done. Mara drew her hand away from the wall. The sound came again, closer this time, though still delayed, as if the house were replaying something she hadn't heard the first time. "Hello," she said. Her voice felt too soft, swallowed almost immediately by the narrow space. Then, after a pause, too long to be an echo, her voice came back. "Hello." But it wasn't quite right. The pitch was off by a fraction, and the tone carried no breath behind it. It was her voice, stripped of presence. Mara swallowed. "Is someone here?" Silence followed. Thick, expectant. Then, "Is someone here?" The same wrongness. She didn't move into the hallway. Instead, she leaned back slightly, letting the living room light touch more of the floor. The wetness reflected it unevenly, breaking the glow into fractured shapes that trembled despite the still air. The rug hadn't been dragged. There were no fibers left behind, no marks where it had been pulled away. It was simply gone, as if it had never existed. And yet the wetness traced its outline perfectly. Mara took a step forward before she realized she'd decided to. Her bare foot hovered over the edge of the damp wood, hesitating. The house inhaled. That was the only way she could describe it. A subtle tightening in the air, a pressure that gathered without sound. She stepped down. The floor was cold, not unpleasantly so, but deeply, persistently cold, like something that held on to absence rather than temperature. Behind her, the floor creaked. Mara turned. Nothing had moved. But a second later, the creak came again, from the exact spot she had just left. Not a replay. Not quite. A correction. She moved forward again, faster now, crossing the wet patch in 2 steps. The cold clung to her skin longer than it should have, lingering as if reluctant to release her. At the end of the hallway, the kitchen light was already on. Mara stopped. She was certain, absolutely certain, she had turned it off before going to bed. She remembered the click of the switch, the way the room had folded into darkness. Now it glowed softly, illuminating the doorway with a steady, indifferent light. "You left it on," she murmured, more to herself than anything else. The house responded immediately. "You left it on." This time there was no delay. The words came from behind her. Mara's breath caught. She turned slowly, scanning the hallway. Empty. The wet patch gleamed faintly, reflecting the kitchen light. The walls stood unchanged, their pale paint unbroken. She backed toward the kitchen. The air shifted as she crossed the threshold, warmer here, but not in a comforting way. The warmth felt borrowed, as if it didn't belong to the space. The sink dripped. One drop fell, then another, each landing with a hollow plink that echoed longer than it should have. The sound stretched, elongated, filling the room with a lingering resonance that outlasted its source. Mara stepped closer. The faucet was off. Another drop fell. But this time, the sound came before the drop hit the basin. She froze. A moment later, the water followed. Her reflection in the window above the sink stared back at her, faint and wavering against the dark outside. She leaned in slightly, trying to see past it into the yard. Her reflection leaned a fraction of a second too late. Mara blinked. The reflection blinked with her, but again, just behind. She moved her head to the side. The reflection lagged, then corrected, snapping into place as if catching up. No, she whispered. No, the reflection said, perfectly synchronized this time. But Mara hadn't spoken yet. Her throat tightened. She hadn't made that sound. She was certain of it. She stepped back from the sink. The reflection stayed where it was for a heartbeat longer, watching her from the glass, before drifting backward to match her position. The drip sounded again. Then again. Each time, the sound came just before the drop. Anticipation. The house wasn't echoing. It was predicting. Mara turned away, moving quickly now, almost tripping over her own feet as she left the kitchen. The hallway seemed longer than before, the far end receding slightly as she approached it. Stop, she said, though she wasn't sure what she was addressing. Stop, the house replied. But the word came from ahead of her this time. She slowed. The air grew colder with each step, a gradual seep that pressed against her skin. Her breath became faintly visible, curling in front of her in thin, uncertain wisps. Halfway down the hallway, she paused. Something shifted behind her. Not a sound. Something else. A presence, subtle but undeniable, like the awareness of being watched. She didn't turn. Instead, she listened. A moment passed. Then another. And then, softly, from behind her, the sound of her own breathing. But she wasn't breathing. Her chest was still, held tight as she listened. The borrowed breath came again, a slow inhale followed by a measured exhale, perfectly imitating the rhythm she had fallen into earlier. Mara's pulse spiked. It's just the house, she said under her breath. It's just the house, came the response, overlapping her words, not following them. She flinched. The timing was wrong. Not delayed. Not anticipated. Synchronized. She forced herself to move, stepping out of the cold and into the living room. The lamp still burned steadily, casting a warm, familiar glow that now felt staged, like a memory of comfort rather than the thing itself. The couch was where she had left it. The book she'd been reading lay open on the armrest. Everything was exactly as it should be. Except for the silence. The house had gone quiet. Not empty, quiet, intentional. Mara stood in the center of the room, unsure whether to move or remain still. The absence of sound pressed against her ears, thick and absolute. Then, from somewhere above, a footstep. She looked up sharply. The second floor was dark, the hallway invisible from where she stood. Another step followed. Then another. Each one came slightly before the imagined motion that should have produced it, as though the house were rehearsing a sequence it hadn't performed yet. Mara backed toward the front door. The knob turned. She stopped. She hadn't touched it. The metal twisted slowly, deliberately, stopping just before the latch released. Then, after a pause, it turned back. The sound came a second later. Mara's reflection flickered in the darkened window. Beside the door, she glanced at it, and saw herself already reaching for the handle. Her real hand hovered at her side. The reflection's hand closed around the knob. A moment later, her own fingers twitched. No, she whispered. No, the reflection echoed, but its mouth moved a fraction ahead of hers. The synchronization was tightening. She stepped back. The reflection followed, but slower this time, as if adjusting. Learning. Mara pressed her back against the wall. The house responded instantly. A faint pressure met her through the plaster, like something leaning back. Her breath hitched. The borrowed breathing returned, matching her now, perfectly in time. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. She tried to change the rhythm, short, quick breaths. The house matched them. She held her breath. The house held it too. The silence deepened. Then, before she could inhale again, the house did. Her lungs followed involuntarily, pulling in air in sync with the unseen rhythm. Mara gasped and pushed away from the wall. The pressure vanished. For a moment, everything was still. Then the sound came. Her voice, from the hallway. The hallway rug was missing, and the floor beneath it was wet. Mara's stomach dropped. She hadn't said that aloud. Not since she'd first seen it. The house had. It was remembering. Repeating. But this time, the words carried something else, an undercurrent, a subtle shift in tone that suggested not recollection, but rehearsal. Mara moved toward the hallway again, drawn despite herself. The wet patch remained, unchanged. But the air above it shimmered faintly, like heat rising from a surface that wasn't warm. She crouched slightly, peering closer. Her reflection stared back at her from the sheen. It smiled. Mara jerked upright. Her own mouth was still. The reflection's smile lingered, then slowly faded as if reconsidering. "You're not reacting," the house said. The voice came from everywhere at once: walls, floor, ceiling, layered and overlapping. Mara shook her head, backing away. "I'm not," she began. "I'm not," the house repeated, perfectly aligned. It was no longer delayed. No longer anticipatory. It was with her. Every movement, every word, every breath mirrored in real time. The difference, the gap that had allowed her to distinguish herself from it, was gone. Mara stood very still. The house did the same. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, carefully, she raised her hand. The house raised it with her. She lowered it. The house followed. Perfect. Complete. Mara's heart pounded. "This isn't real," she said. "This isn't real," the house replied. Not echoing. Not predicting. Speaking. The same moment, the same tone. She tried to step back. Her body hesitated. For a split second, she felt resistance, not physical, but something deeper, like the suggestion of movement conflicting with another intention. Then she moved. The house moved. Together. Always together. The realization settled slowly, heavily. It wasn't catching up anymore. It had caught up. The temperature stabilized, the strange fluctuations fading into a steady, neutral calm. The reflections aligned perfectly. The sounds matched their sources without delay or anticipation. Everything was normal. Perfectly normal. Mara stood in the hallway, looking down at the wet patch that no longer seemed unusual. The rug had never been there. The floor had always been like this. Hadn't it? She frowned. The thought felt right. Comfortable. The house was quiet, but not in that oppressive, waiting way. This was a settled quiet, a completed silence. Mara turned toward the kitchen. The light was on. It had always been on. She stepped forward. Her foot met the floor. The sound came exactly when it should. No echo. No delay. She breathed in. The air filled her lungs smoothly. Without interference. Behind her, the house breathed too. Not mimicking. Not following. Simply breathing. With her. Mara paused in the doorway, a faint unease stirring at the edges of her awareness. Something had changed. Something important. But the details slipped away as soon as she tried to grasp them. The house didn't need to remember anymore. It didn't need to anticipate. It didn't need to listen. Mara stood still, her reflection in the window watching her with perfect stillness. For a moment, she thought she saw it move first. But the thought dissolved before it could take shape. The house had learned her completely. Every movement, every breath, every thought, before it became a thought. It had synchronized. And now it no longer needed to follow. Because there was nothing left to follow. Only the quiet, seamless motion of something that had already become part of her. Or perhaps, something she had already become part of. Mara exhaled. The house did not echo it. It did not repeat it. It did not anticipate it. It simply was. And in that stillness, a final understanding settled gently into place. The house had never been reacting to her. It had been preparing. And now that it was ready, it no longer needed to listen. She found a photo of herself sleeping, taken from the ceiling. At first, it didn't feel like fear. It felt like confusion, thick, slow, and oddly gentle, like waking up into a thought that hadn't finished forming. Lena lay on her side, her phone still warm in her hand, the pale blue glow of the screen washing softly over her sheets. The room around her was quiet in the particular way apartments get at night, sealed off from the world, insulated by walls that held silence too tightly. Her comforter was bunched near her waist, cotton twisted into loose folds. One bare foot peeked out, cold against the air. She became aware of that cold gradually, as if her body had only just remembered to notice it. The photo filled the screen. She stared at it without blinking. It was her. There was no question about that. The same room, the same bed, the same cheap bedside lamp with the dented shade. Her hair was splayed across the pillow in a way she recognized, flattened on one side, slightly curled where it dried unevenly after a shower. Her arm lay draped across her stomach, fingers slack. She was asleep. Not posed. Not arranged. Asleep in the unguarded, slightly ungraceful way sleep creates. The angle was wrong. That was the first clear thought that separated itself from the fog. The photo had been taken directly above her, perfectly vertical, centered over the bed. Not from the corner of the ceiling. Not from a ladder or a raised surface. From the ceiling itself. Lena sat up slowly. The movement felt careful, as though anything sudden might disturb something unseen. Her eyes lifted, almost reluctantly. The ceiling stared back, blank and familiar. White. Flat. Unbroken. There was no fixture above her bed. No camera. No smoke detector. Nothing that could have held a lens, nothing that could have seen her from that angle. Her gaze dropped back to the phone. The image didn't change. It didn't blur or distort under scrutiny. If anything, it grew sharper the longer she looked. She tapped the screen. The metadata opened. Timestamp. 3:12 a.m. Lena glanced at the clock on her nightstand. 4:38 a.m. A small, quiet space opened in her chest. She had been asleep at 3:12. She was certain of it, not because she remembered sleeping, but because there was nothing there. No memory, no interruption, no fragment of waking. She scrolled down. Device. Unknown. The word sat there, clean and unhelpful. Her thumb hovered, then tapped back to the image. The stillness of the room pressed in around her. It wasn't just silence, it was an absence of movement. The air felt unmoving, as though the room had settled into a shape it didn't intend to change. Lena swung her legs over the side of the bed. The floor was cool, textured faintly with the unevenness of old wood beneath thin laminate. Her toes curled instinctively. Okay, she whispered. Her voice sounded too loud. The room didn't echo. Instead, it seemed to absorb the sound, holding it somewhere just out of reach. She stood, still staring at the phone, then lifted it slightly, aligning the image with reality. The bed matched. The pillow. The way the blanket dipped where her body had been. But something else was off. In the photo, the ceiling above her looked different. She tilted her head up again. There, above the bed. Nothing. Smooth paint. A faint hairline crack stretching diagonally toward the corner. She had noticed that crack before. It had been there for months. But in the photo, her thumb pressed against the screen, zooming in. There was a mark. Faint. Circular. Like a stain just beginning to form. Centered exactly above where her chest had been. Lena's breath slowed. She lowered the phone. The ceiling stared back, unchanged. No, she murmured. No, that's. Her words trailed off. She stepped onto the bed. The mattress dipped under her weight, springs creaking softly. The sound came a fraction too late, as though the bed had needed a moment to decide whether to respond. She froze. The creak came again. Not louder. Not repeated. Just corrected. Lena looked down, then back up. She raised the phone again, angling it toward the ceiling. The live view showed nothing unusual. But when she lowered it, the photo still held the stain. Her throat tightened. Lighting, she said softly. It's just the lighting. The explanation settled poorly. She stepped off the bed and moved toward the doorway, the phone still in her hand. The hallway beyond was dim, lit only by a faint spill from the living room. Everything looked normal. She turned back. The bed sat undisturbed, the sheets slightly rumpled where she had been. And above it, for a moment, she thought she saw it. A faint shadow, circular, hovering just at the edge of visibility. Then it was gone. Lena blinked hard. Okay, she said again, louder this time. The room held her voice. Then, softly, after a delay. Okay. She turned sharply. No one stood behind her. The hallway remained empty. Her pulse began to climb. That's just neighbors, she said, though the sound hadn't come from the walls. Silence followed. Heavy. Waiting. Lena forced herself to move. She stepped into the hallway, each footfall muted, the floorboards refusing to creak until after she had already shifted her weight. The delay was subtle, but once noticed, impossible to ignore. Step. Then creak. Step. Then creak. Like the house was following her, not supporting her. She reached the living room and stopped. The window reflected her faintly, the glass a dark mirror against the night. She could see the outline of her body, the glow of her phone, the pale oval of her face. Her reflection lifted the phone. A moment later, she did the same. Lena's stomach dropped. No, she whispered. The reflection's lips moved. No sound came. Then, a second later, her own whisper filled the room. She backed away from the window, breath tightening. The photo pulsed faintly in her hand, not visually, but in the way her attention kept snapping back to it, like a thought she couldn't stop revisiting. She opened it again. The image hadn't changed. But now, looking closer, her sleeping face, there was something wrong with it. Her expression was too still. Not peaceful, empty, as though sleep had been removed from it, leaving only the shape behind. And her eyes, closed, but not fully. A thin line of darkness showed beneath her lids, like something watching from inside. Lena locked the phone and pressed it against her chest. No, she said again, more firmly. No, this is a glitch. Or someone hacked it. Or, her voice faltered. The word, someone, felt wrong. There was no sign of entry. No disturbance. Nothing missing. Just the photo. She exhaled slowly and forced herself to think. Okay. Recreate it. The idea came abruptly, but it held. If I can recreate it, then it's just perspective. Just angle. She returned to the bedroom. The air felt colder now, though she couldn't say when that had changed. The temperature seemed to shift in gradients, subtle enough to doubt but persistent enough to feel. She stood beside the bed and looked up again. Ceiling. Flat. Unreachable. No ladder. No loft. No upper access. She dragged a chair in from the kitchen. The legs scraped faintly across the floor, but the sound came just after the movement, trailing behind it. Lena ignored it. She climbed onto the chair, balancing carefully, then stood on her toes, stretching her arm upward with the phone. The angle wasn't right. Even fully extended, she couldn't center the frame. The perspective skewed, edges tilting outward. She snapped a photo anyway. The result appeared on her screen. Wrong. Too angled. Too human. She climbed down. Her heart was beating faster now, each pulse louder than it should have been in the quiet. There's no way, she whispered. There's no way, the house replied. This time, the voice came from above. Lena froze. Slowly, she lifted her head. The ceiling stared back. But now, there was something there. Faint. The circular stain from the photo. It wasn't fully visible. Not solid. But present, like a memory pressing through the surface. Centered directly over the bed. Her breath hitched. The stain darkened slightly. Not spreading. Focusing. As though something behind it were adjusting. Watching. Lena stepped back. The floor creaked immediately this time. No delay. The house was getting better. Her reflection in the mirror across the room caught her movement, but lagged, just slightly, like it was deciding how to follow. She turned toward it. The reflection turned a fraction too late. Then snapped into place. Her pulse roared in her ears. She raised the phone again. The original photo remained unchanged. But something new had appeared. At the edge of the frame. A shadow. Subtle. Almost indistinguishable from darkness. But shaped. Curved slightly inward. Like something pressed against the ceiling, just outside the captured center. Lena's fingers trembled. That wasn't there, she whispered. That wasn't there, came the response. Perfectly aligned. No delay. No anticipation. With her. She looked up. The stain pulsed faintly. The air thickened. For a moment, she felt it, not physically, but undeniably. A presence. Not in the room. In the structure of it. In the ceiling. In the space above her that should have been empty. Watching. Not through a lens. Not through a device. But directly. The realization came slowly, like something assembling itself from fragments. The angle. The impossible perspective. The metadata. Unknown device. Because it wasn't a device. Her breath slowed. The house didn't echo it. Didn't follow. It matched. It had always been there. In the walls, in the ceiling, in the quiet spaces between sounds. Learning, observing, rehearsing. The delayed footsteps. The anticipatory drip. The reflections that lagged and corrected. It hadn't been broken. It had been practicing. Lena lowered the phone. Her hands were steady now. The fear had changed shape. No longer sharp, no longer urgent. Something deeper. Heavier. Understanding. The stain above her darkened slightly, settling into clarity. Centered. Precise. She stepped onto the bed again. This time, the mattress creaked exactly when it should. The house no longer needed to adjust. She lay down slowly, aligning herself with the position in the photo. Head on the pillow, arm across her stomach, foot angled just slightly outward. The ceiling loomed above her. The stain hovered, waiting. Her eyes drifted half closed. Not asleep, not fully awake. Somewhere in between. The space where observation felt easiest. Her phone rested beside her, screen still glowing faintly. The photo remained unchanged, except, at the very edge, a second shadow. Closer now, more defined. Framing her. Not capturing. Positioning. Lena's chest rose and fell. The house breathed with her. Not mimicking. Not following. Simply present. Ready. The stillness deepened. The room settled into itself. Complete. And in that quiet, final moment of clarity, Lena understood. The photo hadn't been taken by a person. It hadn't been taken by a camera. It hadn't even been taken in the way photos are taken. It had been made by the house, from the only place it had ever needed to be. Above her, around her, part of her space in a way she had never questioned. The ceiling stain darkened one last time. Not spreading, opening, and as her breathing slowed, sinking perfectly. With the quiet structure surrounding her, the last distinction dissolved. The house didn't need to observe anymore. Didn't need to learn. Didn't need to experiment with delay or anticipation. It had found the perfect angle. And now, it no longer needed to take the photo again.